Rupert Lowe has reappeared on GB News for the first time in months since Restore Britain launched as a national political party, and we all know why he and Restore Britain's surrogates were banned. It's because GB News is one of the hands on the Ming vase trying to escort Reform UK into Downing Street. Nigel Farage is a shareholder on the station. Reform chairman David Bull admitted that Rupert Lowe had been blacklisted due to an editorial decision. And, yeah, I've been banned. Charlie Downs used to be a regular on Michelle Dewberry's show, very popular, even had his own show with Alice Grant, stopped getting calls, etc., etc. And the interesting revelation came from Restore Britain themselves, who let slip that a whole section from Rupert's interview was cut. It was replaced instead with Tom Harwood doing a VPN ad to make up the money on their digital output that has been lost from the millions that have been spent on their terrestrial TV output, and they've lost money because of an advertising boycott. Anyway, the segment that wasn't included was Jacob asking Rupert about what happened regarding Reform's attempt to put him in prison. Remember, Nigel Farage said at his announcement of his shadow cabinet that it was brutal but necessary to file a false police report against Rupert Lowe, as well as subject his office in Great Yarmouth and in Parliament to false bullying accusations in a KC's report, because Rupert Lowe wanted to deport the perpetrators of the Pakistani rape gangs, and that moved beyond the bounds of reasonableness, morality, and decency, and so it was at that point that Nigel Farage knew he had to get rid of it. Of course, that looks really, really bad to those viewers of GB News who think that Nigel Farage is going to deport the rape gang perpetrators, and who have been misled into thinking that Rupert Lowe was some sort of troublesome upstart who just couldn't be kept within the Reform ranks, otherwise he would split the vote and lose 2029. So, Jacob raised how Rupert's guns were seized, his home was raided by armed police on a late Friday night as a direct result of the Reform allegations. Rupert explained, following Jacob's questioning, that Farage had admitted their attempt to incriminate Rupert and imprison him on false allegations, and it was entirely because he disagreed with Rupert's position on deporting foreign child rapists. Rupert's position is that foreign rapists and their accomplices should be removed, one that the British people agree with. This was cut from the interview. And one may say it's because Rupert put it in terms that the GB News executives would be worried that Farage would cause a stink over, but it's also partially because Reform can't sustain scrutiny from not just their right, but just truthful scrutiny. I mean, I'm a member of the Jordan Peterson generation, where I took to heart the principle, tell the truth, or at least do not lie, because a lie is what sustains totalitarian states. So I've read my Solzhenitsyn, I know that the lie was at the heart of the Soviet Union. And so, if a political party requires, as a barrier to entry, you to lie, and to flatter the ego of the leader, then I'm sorry, I just don't trust that political project. I'm only going to support a political project that's willing to tell the truth. And Rupert did that in this interview. He sat across from Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is, again, one of the avatars of, I'd say high Toryism, but the complete lack of content to that Toryism. Jacob Rees-Mogg, and I'm sure he's a nice guy, he has all the affectation of a Tory aristocrat, but none of the connection, the rootedness to our country, and therefore the willingness to defend it. Remember, Jacob Rees-Mogg told Stephen Edgington that demographic change is not his concern, just like Nigel Farage. And throughout this interview, I think Rees-Mogg agreed to do it, or at least proposed it, because, much like David Starkey's interview with me, the operation that's being run at the moment of uniting the right was put to Rupert. And what I think is happening is, on the Reform side, it's being stocked full of old Tories, like Robert Jenrick, Suella Braverman, Dean Dorries, Nadim Zahawi. There's like 20 of them now. Some of them are running as local councillor candidates at the current May elections. Vote for Reform if you want more Tories, I suppose. But what that's done is make many members of the Tory party who have been repudiated at the last election. Some have lost their seats, some were still in government but recognised that they couldn't win another election, like Danny Kruger. They recognise that this is disastrous, and they recognise the Reform is ascendant, but they're not comfortable with the extent to which they thought Reform was a radical party, and so packing it full of old Tories quietens their anxieties and makes it resemble another colour of the Uniparty. And then, on the actual Tory side, because remember, Jacob Rees-Mogg and David Starkey are still members of the Tory party, they are looking to contain the radical energy represented by Restore Britain by trying to funnel Rupert if he's not in reform, into the Tory party. Because remember, the Tories gave Rupert a committee assignment. I know that they offered Rupert the whip multiple times, and he politely declined because he's a gentleman. But he knows that his reputation is ascendant, and the Tories are a poisoned brand. I mean, I've spoken to Tory staffers, and they've said, okay, well, what do you think of us? What do you think of what Kemi's doing? And I've just said, look, man, putting a first-generation immigrant in charge of a party that was voted out of office because it inflicted record immigration on us while promising to do the opposite was a terrible move. I'm not even making a character judgment of Kemi Badenoch. I don't think her use of the word white as a pejorative reflects well on her, but nevertheless, you know, you can probably do some good things in shifting the Overton window in the meantime, but I just think you're a busted flush, especially with, you know, Priti Patel and James Cleverly and all the architects of the Boris wave still in the shadow cabinet. It's just not going to work. And Rupert knows that. And Rupert knows that he has a fantastic social media game, that he has credibility among young men because he just says to every accusation of racism or all the old taboos rattled in his face, I don't care. I care more about defending my country than I do about your spells and incantations from the liberal media who would like to see it destroyed. And so he knows that if he were to join the Tory party, not only would his radical energy be contained and safely prevented from upsetting the delicate ecosystem crafted by the likes of William Hague and Michael Gove, but also he knows that the Tory party would be stealing like Shang Tsung or Dementor, the kind of credibility that he's built up. And so he knows that the Tories stand to gain from having him in their party, but he stands to gain nothing, actually. And so that's why he started his own party, as well as sitting through the privately funded rape gang hearings, which, you know, he kept his promise on. Nigel Farage promised to fund the private inquiry and private prosecutions, and then didn't keep his promise, but Rupert did, even though he was expelled from the party and therefore had none of the funds to do so. He had to crowdfund it. After sitting through those hearings, and despite, you know, Nick Timothy, and there was a Labour MP that showed up, and Carla Lockhart as well. Carla Lockhart's a solid MP from Northern Ireland. Despite that, he knows that the Tories are just as complicit as Labour. Remember George Osborne on his podcast with Ed Balls, one of these uniparty panel shows where ex-politicians pretend to disagree, but they actually agree on everything. George Osborne said, yeah, there was a decision in the Conservative Party that we couldn't make enough political capital out of it against Labour, so we just didn't really touch the issue. So they knew it was going on, and they just thought, oh, we couldn't make the cover-up of industrial-scale child rape by Pakistani Muslim immigrants into some sort of political gain, so we just didn't bother to deliver justice for the victims. I mean, just how cynical and immoral. Rupert, again, said, I don't care. I care more about the victims than I do about political correctness, and so I'm going to do it. And so because he recognises that the Tory party brand is contaminated, because he recognises that there is no credibility left in the Tories to deliver on their promises to clean up the mess that they made, and because he realises that they're morally repugnant for the things that their politicians have done, he just sat across from Rees-Mogg and mogged him. He gave him the business. He just said, look, the Tories had their turn on the playset, and what did they do that was any good? They've ruined the country, and so they don't deserve to be elected again. So we're going to watch a couple of clips and just go through it.
You talk about being put on the PAC, the Public Accounts Committee, by the Tories. You therefore found in Parliament that you need to work with other parties to achieve things. What are you trying to achieve with Restore? Why is it necessary for you to have your own party rather than be part of a bigger team?
Because
Why don't you just join the Tories that have ruined the country, Rupert? Here's a good answer.
I think the two-party system, as I call it, the Reds and the Blues, I mean, I discount the Lib Dems, the Greens and all the rest of them as a bit of a rabble. But the two-party system, the Reds and the Blues, have let Britain down badly. I think the quality of MPs in both parties has been basically dropping over time. Tony Blair, as you say, created this sort of almost bureaucratic structure within Parliament, and he filled it with MPs who suited that sort of mould. David Cameron, I think, admired Tony Blair, took the Tory party to the left and pursued a similar agenda in terms of almost trying to out-Blair Tony Blair, as a result of which we...
On that point, he is correct. Michael Gove was swanning around the Department of Education, handing out copies of Tony Blair's biography, saying this is what we believe, a bit like Thatcher slapping Hayek's Road to Serfdom on the table for our ministers. And David Cameron wrote in 2022 in The Times, we were all white men and I decided to do something about it, saying that in order to deflect accusations of what Theresa May, while she was Conservative Party chair, then of course David Cameron's Home Secretary, called the Nasty Party, he just filled it with women and minority shortlists. And he got up at events and said, we need to pack the Conservative Party full of Muslim leadership. So, in pursuit of regaining political power from New Labour, David Cameron and the Tories morphed into just a tribute act to Tony Blair. And so that's why the Conservative Party were actually kind of like Blairite accelerationists, and this has delivered us to the position where Boris Johnson disrupted the delicate ecosystem, the give and take between Tories and Labour, where Tories are the controlled opposition that allow the Fabian socialists to get back into power and continue the revolution, because the Tories actually cement the gains of the revolution and don't want to undo it, because if you're a Tory, you're just, dispositionally opposed to change, even though you're still a liberal. And Boris Johnson didn't understand this delicate balance, and so opened the floodgates to make the Financial Times like him again, according to Dominic Cummings, and because under the Boris wave, immigration exceeded 1.2 million from the Third World, now the Tory party has no favourability among the public. Labour is hated. Keir Starmer is the most hated Prime Minister on record. They're going to be diminished down to the tens of seats at the next election, and it looks like space has opened up for not just an authentic party of the left, which the Greens are trying to be, and form an immigrant and progressive coalition against the native majority of the country, as they are looking to become a minority in their own country thanks to the Tory and Labour immigration policies, but also on the right. And Reform were meant to be that party of the right. They were meant to be the authentic anti-establishment option, but then they filled themselves with Tories. So the spot is still vacant, and Rupert Lowe has a fresh start, 3 years, a strong track record of credibility on the issues like immigration and the rape gang scandal, and has already promised not to fill his party with senior career politicians. So, it's not just going to be the Tories in dark blue rather than light blue or blue. Sounds excellent to me.
We've got a lot of one nation Tories, not true Tories. I would be a true Tory if I was anything, not a one nation Tory.
People were jumping on that, and they were saying, oh, he's saying he's a Tory. No, he's saying if he were still a Tory, he hasn't been since 1993, when he left the party to join Jimmy Goldsmith's referendum party to stop John Major dragging us into the euro. He would say that he would be what the old Tories in the 19th century were, not the current crop of Tories which David Cameron has redefined the party as. And the fact that he's not in the Tory party shows you that the Tory party is a busted flush. It is irredeemable. It cannot be voted in, as he says later. So he's saying that you guys failed your own philosophy and you made me necessary.
I promised not to call them Lib Dem Tories as part of my agreement, but so we won't call them that. But
this was something else that everyone jumped all over. They're saying, oh, he's got secret agreement with the Tory party. This is something that Jack Hadfield was spreading around. And look, I've met Jack. He's a nice chap, but this is just fundamentally dishonest. He's saying Rupert Lowe won't call wet Tories Lib Dems as part of his agreement. Does Lowe have a secret pact with the Conservative Party? We need an answer for what sort of agreement Lowe has. No, Rupert Lowe doesn't have a secret pact with the Conservative Party. I know Rupert. All of the people running Restore Britain were the groomsmen at my wedding. I know them very, very well. No, there is not some secret pact with the Conservative Party. Everyone in Restore Britain understands that the Tories are absolute traitors, and we'd like to see a lot of Boris's cabinet in prison for doing the Boris way. So no secret pact with the Tory party. And as I pointed out to Jack, what he's saying is here, he is winding Jacob Rees-Mogg up, because he's saying, I was told not to say this as a condition of the interview, because GB News are very censorious, as we've already pointed out. They're censorious towards Reform UK, they're going to be also quite censorious towards the Tories to try and make a Tory reform pact. This is something that Paul Marshall, owner of GB News, believes in. He was winding Jacob up by saying, oh, I won't say this in the process of saying it. So he was actually insulting the Tories as wet Lib Dems by saying, well, I won't say that they're wet Lib Dems. And also, sorry, if Reform supporters, of which Jack is one, is worried about Tory infiltration, Jack, the call is coming from inside the house. Boris's cabinet are basically all in Reform now. We're just waiting for Johnson himself to complete the set. Rail Braverman was actually sharing this around, and you can't see the tweets because Rail has mysteriously deleted his account as of this morning. I don't know why. But he shared Jack's clip and suggested that, oh no, Rupert let slip this secret plan to make a pact with the Tories. It's like, Rail, till a couple of months ago, your wife is a Tory MP. They treated her terribly, don't get me wrong. But coming from you, it's not the best. And then I pointed out, as we'll watch the clip in a moment, from the same interview, Rupert sits there and says, what did the Tories do with an 80-seat majority? Nothing.
First, all of the malign legislation that Tony Blair had passed. If you look at your argument, it's quite a recidivist argument. What you're saying is you shouldn't make your own offering which you think the people want, because you might cause a problem to the existing parties who've let them down.
No, it's because I'm saying you don't have a chance of winning.
But if the Tories win, Jacob, they've already had a play with an 80-seat majority. What did they do with it? You tell me.
Well, it doesn't look as if the Tories can win from
what did they do with an 80-seat majority?
Level, which
what did they do?
We left the European Union, which is quite important.
Well, we played a part in that too.
Well, you weren't in Parliament to play a part in
I was in the European Parliament.
The European Parliament, fortunately, was abolished when we left, from our point of view.
I left the European Parliament at that time, so I know that. But you tell me, what did the Tories do with an 80-seat majority that you were proud of, other than that?
We introduced the free speech higher education bill. We began the process of deregulating.
Why didn't you reverse all of the malign legislation that Tony Blair had passed?
Because I had a bill to remove 5,000 EU laws, and unfortunately Rishi Sunak kiboshed it because he was hopeless. But
Tory.
Is this the face of a man that thinks the Tories deserve another spin on the electoral merry-go-round? I mean, he did just mog Jacob Rees-Mogg by just going Tory, because he says Tory because it's become synonymous with traitor and useless. So to turn around and say, oh, Rupert Lowe secretly let slip that he's got a pact with the Tories, when in the same interview, a few minutes later, even in the preview clip that was aired live on GB News the night before the full thing, and I'll link the full interview down in the description, was aired online, Rupert still made this remark. He was still saying, Tories, useless. So the idea that Rupert is forging a secret pact with the Tories to scupper reform, when reform are full of ex-Tories that Nigel Farage has celebrated at press conferences with fireworks, handshakes and fanfare, is ridiculous. And so the Post is dishonest, so is Jack, so is all of the various reform surrogates that were making this point. You know, Stephen Barrett, who actually hasn't disclosed that he now works for reform in their offices, so, you know, take all of his reform apologetics with a pinch of salt. It's just, you don't need to resort to lying. And this is what I don't like. I just don't like the fact that reform are willing to lie, to play dirty tricks. I mean, I had a leak from someone working for reform that they were going to send an armada of canvassers and supporters down to Great Yarmouth to try to, quote, strangle Restore in the crib, because they recognise that if Restore gets as much as 5% at the next election, and they've already surpassed that in various Find Out Now polls when prompted, Reform are going to be robbed of a majority. And the point is not to rob Reform of a majority. The point is not to enable the Tories to force a coalition with Reform. The point is to surpass them both, because they're both full of liars and traitors and people who act dishonourably and dishonestly. And I'm sorry, we just can't have another government that is full of cowards and people that are willing to lie and cover their own arse and enrich themselves at the expense of our country. Like, we've all got kids to worry about, or are going to have kids to worry about, and I am not willing to give Reform another go and give them a chance to screw it all up and make my kids foot the bill for their lack of appetite to actually fix the problems that now some of their own MPs, like Jenrick and Kruger, Dorries, well, defector, Zahawi defector, caused. I'm just not going to do it, and neither is Rupert. And Rail said, well, what sort of agreement was he referring to? And as I pointed out, it's probably the conditions for Rupert to reappear on GB News, which is why he said, I won't say, to say the thing he wasn't meant to say to wind Jacob up. But Reform place very censorious conditions on the podcasts and platforms that their personnel can appear on. For example, before the great Peter Whittle's death, before Deprogram was cancelled, myself and Harrison Pitt, Reform put us on an official blacklist. That's why Zia Yusuf kept booking and then cancelling interviews with Peter Whittle. Layla Cunningham did the same. Lee Anderson did the same with us on Deprogrammed. Also, now that blacklist has been lifted and New Culture Forum are covering Reform events, now their personnel will go on. And I'm glad they are, actually, because, I mean, Danny Kruger's latest interview with the New Culture Forum was a disaster. Check the comments. I'll link my review of that down in the description. But Emma Trimble, who is a Reform member, sympathetic, is inadvertently doing excellent work, just letting Reform politicians talk at length and expose themselves for being members of the Liberal Unit Party, self-described Liberals. Also, Zia Yusuf went on a series of interview podcasts last year, and he banned the hosts from asking about the Rupert Lowe situation. I know this, I had it confirmed. So, not surprising if GB News put strict restrictions on what Rupert Lowe could talk about were he to reappear, and so therefore it's not surprising that they took an entire section out where he was critical of Farage, because GB News are involved in massaging Farage's ego. This is why a bunch of reform surrogates and actual MPs frequently appear or have their own shows on GB News, even though they aren't getting great ratings. And so it's just not honest to distort the clip in this way. And I don't think people want more dishonesty. I think instead people want what Rupert is offering, which is the destruction of the Uniparty, an actual honest alternative, not just a recycling bin for the careers of failed, washed-up politicians. And so Rupert continued to give the business to Rees-Mogg in this interview.
And that leaves you with your own party. And the question is, where is your own party going? Because JL Partners did some polling on your name recognition. And your name recognition is lower than mine, which you would have thought was almost impossible as you're the leader of a party.
Okay, Jacob Rees-Mogg's been around in politics for about 20-odd years. He's just had a reality show. He's a bit of a character. He has his own GB News show. So it's not surprising that he has higher name recognition. But Rupert is also the best performing politician on social media in all of Britain. And he's gone from 0% to 8% in about a year. It's same with his party, actually. And don't forget, there seems to be this delusion of a neat divide between online and real life. It turns out everyone online, bar the Indian bots that Farage keeps blaming for Rupert's organic performance, but, you know, Farage's running actual Indian nationals as his party, so don't care. Bar the bots, they're people with accounts and personal lives and friendships, and it means that they talk to the people in their personal lives about the issues that concern them. And so the conversations on X make their way into the pub, especially when young people are involved and they're only one step removed from their parents or their grandparents. And so, and this is just something for everyone watching, consider yourself a brand ambassador for the style of politics that you would like to see. It doesn't even have to be party politics, right? It should be issues-based, and make sure that you're following the Socratic method, rather than just telling people what to think. If people voice a concern about politics, probe on what their concern is. For example, if a young person expresses concerns about the cost of housing, maybe this young person might want to vote Green. You know, the Green Party are basically a party that acknowledges all the problems and promises to make them worse. You should ask them what their concerns are, what their housing costs are, how their savings are going, and then say, why do you think housing is so high? And then lead them onto the territory, the factual territory of, do you think it's something to do with the fact that we're importing 1 million people a year, so that requires us to build a city the size of Birmingham every year, and we're not building that. Those people have to have somewhere to live, and if housing is a fixed commodity, because we're not building the number of houses that are required to house all those people, then the cost of housing goes up because demand goes up, because demand is inflated by the number of people brought into the country. So shouldn't we be voting for a party that says, not just stop bringing so many people in, but also millions of people who are here putting pressure on the housing market that nobody wanted here should also go home where they already have homes? Like, that's an easy way to spread, via word of mouth, awareness of the issues that matter to us, and, in regards to Rupert Lowe and Restore Britain, the party that's going to address it and has credibility to do so. And also, just looking at Restore Britain's ground game, I mean, you've got hundreds of local branches opening up. I've been to one already, I'm going to another this week. They're very well attended, and there's a cross-section of people there. There's people in their 60s, there's, you know, mothers and fathers, construction workers, childminders, nurses, and there's a lot of young lads in their 20s, and it was great to meet all of you patriots at the last one I went to. Hopefully I'll meet some more. And so, if this is a genuine cross-section of society versus Reform's tour of the retirement homes promising to triple lock their pensions and giving giant checks to pay the energy bills of boomers in very wealthy houses, I think this is a more intergenerational and sustainable coalition than just saying, we're going to chase the pensioner vote, which is, unfortunately, and I say this as someone who's had 2 grandparents die recently, and they were absolute patriots, is going to be whittled down by time and attrition. It's much more sensible to build a party based on the concerns of young people and their parents, and some of their sympathetic grandparents, you know, like my surviving grandfather, he's absolutely great guy, I love him to bits, than it is to just say, we're going to be the triple lock your pensions party, just like the Tories are your triple lock your pensions party, and Labour were your triple lock your pensions party until they decided to steal your winter fuel payment to try and balance the budget to spend more money on housing for Somalians, and the Greens are the 5 million immigrants a year party. Like, it seems much more sensible an electoral strategy to pursue growing your reputation based on credibility using word of mouth, ground game, and social media, and to grow that awareness and reputation via policies and messaging among a cohort of voters that can grow. Voters who don't usually vote, mums and dads, and young people who just want to get a start in life. Seems like a sensible strategy to me.
But 92% of people don't know who you are.
Well, Jacob, you're a national treasure. So
that's very flattering.
We've all heard of you because of your sort of eccentricity and your lounging in Parliament, looking like you were sort of in the public school prefect's lounge.
But you better.
Mogged. Absolutely mogged. Look, he's enjoying it. He's comfortable. And it's because Rupert has a patrician's affectation. He always knows he's in the moral right. It's not that he's not humble, but he knows what he thinks and he sticks to his guns. And so he's not going to be wrong-footed by sort of appeals to being disliked by the liberal media or not known. Or nothing's going to knock him off his moral mission. And that's why he feels comfortable, making a sort of jab at Jacob Rees-Mogg. You can't say we don't enjoy it.
Better do some lounging, because with only 8% of people knowing who you are,
I think a lot more than 8% of people. We were stopped by how many people on the way here?
Yeah, but
3 or 4 people.
But
honestly,
this was a poll of 2,200 people. Your name recognition actually gone down in the last year. There's obviously a margin of error.
That's fine. Well,
I don't see how his name recognition would have gone down in the last year when he's launched an international. When he's launched a national political party with international acclaim, upwards of 40 million views on the launch video, and they're polling at 4% unprompted, people just by word of mouth saying, yeah, restore Britain, and but like 7 to 9% prompted. So, sorry, I think that is an outlier poll. And also, again, word of mouth spreads awareness. So, what Rupert has is the ability to make a great first impression with a bunch of new people before the next election. Whereas views on Nigel Farage are locked in. He might have name recognition of, let's say, 60-70%, but that's overwhelmingly more negative than it is positive. And I'm not saying everyone's going to like Rupert. I don't think the Green Party voters, who are sort of like dyed-in-the-wool leftists, men in dresses with cat ears, are going to be too delighted about him being unwilling to let them have access to women's changing rooms, prisons, and toilets. This is something that David Bull actually supports, by the way. He thinks that trans-identifying men should be in women's prisons. Absolutely mental. However, there is a large contingent willing to be won over, and I think you can see that in the elite defections that we're already seeing. For example, John Cleese, Jim Ratcliffe, Duncan Bannatyne, and Jeremy Clarkson. None of them are persuaded by Nigel Farage's carnival barking, but they do all agree on the issues that face the country. The confiscation of land from farmers, the colonisation of Britain by immigrants, the high taxes, the threat of Islamic infiltration into the British Parliament, but also the Scottish Government, as we can see with Anas Sarwar and Humza Yousaf. All of these men recognise these problems, but they don't think Farage is the guy. Yet, Bannatyne, John Cleese, people that have been historically Labour and Lib Dem voters, have become Rupert Lowe's strongest soldiers because they can just see that he has legitimacy. And so, the more people become aware, think, the more favourable rating he will receive.
Right. Let's see, Jacob. I think that's not right.
Okay, but Nigel has taken 30 years on the public stage to get to the point where his party is sometimes at 30% in the polls.
As Rupert points out, his polling has consistently dipped ahead of the local elections. Some outliers are putting it at about 28, but it's floating around 23 to 25%, when they were about 30 to 31% this time last year. And reminder, Boris Johnson won the 2019 election on 51%. So reform should be storming ahead, and they aren't. And it's because they've taken too many self-inflicted wounds, they've admitted too many Tories, they've denounced their own base, and they've created this rival faction to their, well, you could say right, but as Rupert says, it's just common sense. It's what most voters want: restoring the death penalty, deporting all illegal immigrants, having millions of legal migrants go, making sure that benefit scroungers actually start working, making sure the country just looks beautiful and they feel that they belong again. All these things are just common sense. Restore wouldn't exist if Reform hadn't have carved off some of their most loyal supporters in pursuit of the hypothetical moderate Muslim vote, despite Muslims being the least likely group to vote Reform in the country, and the Greens successfully snapping up the entire Muslim vote by saying, Allahu Akbar, we're for Gaza, don't pay any attention to the gay dancing that our Jewish leader is doing. So, and also, a point that's being missed by Mogg here, as exemplified by the deception that has surrounded this interview and the edited out portion that's critical of Farage, If Nigel Farage's name recognition is such a boon, then why can't it sustain criticism? Why is there such a climate of censorship and control over the output of who is in reform and who they're allowed to appear with and be interviewed by, if he is just this Teflon figure, if he's just so well known and so well liked and all the criticisms bounce off him? Why is reform so fragile? Whereas Rupert is willing to walk into any lion's den, he's willing to sit down with Emily Maitness, and when she goes, I think you're a racist, she just goes, don't care, we're deporting the Pakistani rapists. And people going, that's my man. I've been waiting for people my entire life to just have the courage to say that. Haven't voted before, I'm going to vote for that guy.
How credible?
It was at 30% in the polls. It no longer is.
25 to 30. But how
Probably
credible is it to go from nothing, no name recognition, no real public profile, one MP on his own, to winning an election? Don't you need to be working with the Conservative Party as you are on the Public Council?
Maybe I'm deluding myself, Jacob, but I'm going to continue to delude myself, and I'm going to continue to build my party, because I don't think that survey is correct.
All right, but Rupert...
Wouldn't it be better to work with the Conservative Party? No. Definitive answer from Rupert there. There you go. He's just going to keep ploughing his own furrow because all of the other soil is deracinated. Nothing grows in the Tory party or reform.
I don't know who they interviewed and who they talked to, but our polling indicates that we are polling somewhere between 8 and 10%. None of the existing polls are naming us yet, so I don't think that is consistent with what you're asking me with regard to that one, which I think is a rogue poll.
But deluding yourself really matters, because if you make it more likely in 2029 that we get a coalition of possibly Angela Rayner, Zach Polanski, and whoever the SNP leader is, that is disastrous for the country. This isn't a game, this is...
I think the party that makes it more likely for a Lib Dem, SNP, Labour, Green coalition is the party that pretends to be the patriotic party of the country but doesn't put up an encouraging enough offering to make people show up at the polls, and fills its party with former Tories, the architects of our immiseration, and then says, don't worry, you can elect us again to clean up the mess we made. I think that actually destroys the patriotic narrative, just like, you know, Matt Goodwin coming out with all these projections and then writing an AI book with fake quotes. So I think actually making the right-wing or patriotic or common sense narrative look not credible does more damage than putting up an earnest, honest effort, with 3 years still to go, by the way, to actually break apart the uniparty establishment. And again, just a quick reminder here, the Greens keep putting themselves up as an anti-establishment left party, but all the talk keeps being that they would be willing to form a coalition with potentially Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP, to get into power. So if the Greens are anti-establishment but are willing to form a pact with the uniparty, who is the only party that isn't willing to make that Faustian bargain? It's Rupert and Restore.
Really serious?
I do know that, and I can tell you reassuringly that a lot of the people who are joining us, and we now have 131,000 signed up supporters. Now, ours are real supporters. I call the Reform membership the Hotel California membership, because it's easier to sign up, it's less easy to check in, it's less easy to check out.
And to join Restore, you pay £20 on the internet to join.
This is £20 on joining. Can be more. That's the minimum.
Yeah, the minimum. Yeah.
But the important point here is that from the people we're seeing joining up, the exciting thing is that a lot of them have not been involved in British politics for 25 or 30 years. So we are offering them an opportunity to join a party which actually I think is reflective of what they want and what they think. Now, they haven't been offered that. Neither have they been offered it verbally, nor have the hands actually shown that they're going to deliver that. So we're bringing in new voters, Jacob. We're not necessarily dragging voters from Tories or indeed from Reform. We are bringing some, and we had a defection yesterday in South Cornwall of a Reform candidate, a very good man called Roger Tarrant, who joined us, deputy leader of the council down there, shares our view, businessman, got very frustrated with the way in which Reform was dealing with him.
If you bring in new voters, that still doesn't get you to winning a majority. It still leaves the same problem of the right being split.
It increases the common sense vote.
So Jacob argues against this, and then it goes into the clip I played previously where Rupert just goes, well, Tories, they're useless. But every argument about you're going to split the vote, or you need to work with the existing parties in order to form a majority, falls afoul of the fallacy that voting is kind of like a fixed pie. I don't think that with new demographics, voting loyalties are as cemented as they are with football teams or as they are among boomers. You know, people in the north will say, my dad voted Labour, my granddad voted Labour, I'll always vote Labour. I don't think that's the case anymore, which is why you're seeing basically zero support outside of state employees for Labour that aren't in the boomer generation, and no young man is voting Tory. So what you're seeing instead is a lot more fluid, fast-moving political loyalties, mainly driven by the ability to be autodidactic on the internet and actually get more authentic information. And especially, these interviews are important because video clips live in immortality, as Nigel Farage has found with his ill-fated Steve Edgington interview. Anytime he tries to talk about mass deportations now, the clip comes up where he says it's political impossibility, it simply can't be done, which means that he has no credibility on the issue. You can't run from it. And so, if a new party with a good ground game that understands social media, has credibility on the issues, comes on the scene and mobilizes non-voters, but also targets voters who are currently loosely attached to other parties like the Tories or Reform and think that they're voting for something other than they're going to get, and they can show that they're actually going to deliver the promises that you think you're voting for with this other party in this new party, then that means there will be an exodus of support over from the existing establishment parties to the new anti-establishment offering. And we've got 3 years to prove that theory right, and I think because the demographics that are more loosely affiliated with parties, you know, political party membership is actually at its lowest overall throughout history. The Tory party used to have hundreds of thousands of members in days gone by, and now fewer people are involved in party politics. I think you're going to see more younger people, more concerned parents, especially the sort of Zoomers that are growing up and watching all the Restore Britain hype edits. You're going to see them move pretty rapidly over to Rupert. And I think that's encouraging. And then, finally, later in the interview, Mogg keeps insisting that Rupert will, you know, split the vote and that, again, a Tory pact may be necessary. And Rupert just says, well, look, we've got a credible policy offering. We represent a sound alternative to the existing parties. And Mogg is saying, well, where's your policy on this matter or that matter? And Rupert says, well, number one, Reform doesn't really have any policies. I mean, if you look at it, their Operation Restoring Justice is about 3 pages and 2 pages of graphics. Their Boris Wave policy document was pretty bad. I've been over that. I'll link it down in the description. But also, do we really want to talk about the Tories' policy? Do we really want to talk about Boris Johnson's immigration policy? Jacob? Again, scoring points against the Tories, he's just burying them. He's basically just heaping earth onto their electoral grave at this point.
But I want to talk a bit about what your actual policies are. You say you've got a lot coming out, but so far they seem quite niche policies. That what is your defence policy? What are you going to do there? How are you going to fund it? What are you going to do about welfare? Do you support independence of the Bank of England? Are you with Robert Jenrick an advocate for the OBR, which I think is a
well, in the fullness
unfortunate
of time,
thing.
you'll be able to read as you can on our immigration or our deportation policy rather than immigration policy. We've shown the constitutional problems, we've shown the resolution to that, we've shown exactly how we do it. We're going to do the same. So, as you know, I was in the city for 20 years, and I have an economic paper being written at the moment. And basically, my philosophy is Austrian school economics. I like small state.
Yeah.
I like powerful individuals. I like, you know, people who are free. I like personal choice. And at the end of the day, unlike Liz Truss, we will not go off at a tangent and spook the bond markets. We have to show that we're going to properly structure a route to cutting the size of the state, but at the same time ensuring that we don't end up with unfunded deficits. So taxes have to be cut, the state has to be cut. We have to show how we're going to do it. We show again how we make the savings. That's all being done. So you will be able to read in short time. And you tell me how many detailed papers has Reform put out on all these subjects?
So far, none of Reform's none of Reform's policies have stood examination for 24 hours.
Knock them up on the back of an envelope and have a presser the next day.
It's part of the weakness of Reform. It seems to me it's part of the weakness of the splinter groups from the Conservative Party, that the Conservative Party may not always come up with the right policies, but at least it has an understanding of how to formulate policy.
Again, you can see the framing. This interview was done with the purpose of encouraging Rupert, or positioning him proximate to the Tories, at least, but encouraging Rupert to join the Tory party, or at least join forces with the Tory party. And at every opportunity when Mogg brings up the Tory party and tries to massage its reputation, Rupert just goes, nope, and just kicks it again, like De Niro and Pesci and Liotta and Goodfellas. Just kick it, kick it, kick it.
And I think Reform finds this a big weakness.
Let's not talk about Boris's policy on legal immigration, shall we?
Let's talk instead about your policy for deportations and how you think you might make that work.
Immediate differentiation. Restore Britain will reverse the Boris wave. They will strip citizenships from the Boris wave who have got it. They will send millions of legal migrants home. They will deport every single illegal migrant. And they don't care if they're disapproved of by the establishment. In fact, that's a badge of honour. There's some other interesting clips as well that came out of this. Jacob said to Rupert, did you really mean it when you said you would bar foreigners from standing for political office, or was it just one of these things that you threw out offhand? And Rupert said, we shouldn't have any foreign nationals or dual nationals or the like in Parliament, anyone born overseas. And Jacob said, well, wouldn't that bar Boris Johnson from being an MP? And, you know, I don't think that's the example you want to use if you want to encourage people to keep that law on the books, Jacob. But Rupert said, I think Boris will be fine. And what that means is because Boris is ethnically British, even though he's born in America, he would be eligible to run for office. And so that puts Restore Britain in a very different position than every other party. Because every other party is very happy with foreigners holding public office. I mean, Reform promises to ban Commonwealth voting, but is currently standing the Boris wave as candidates at the local council elections. Restore Britain not only says, it's not just that you shouldn't not be born in Britain to be barred from being a politician or voting, like you have to be born in Britain. It's not that. Their standard is, you must have British heritage, because you inherit British citizenship by blood, by ancestry. So, Restore Britain is making a distinction between people who are born in this country, but are not British, versus people who are born overseas, but because they have British heritage, you know, they inherit their British ancestry from their parents, they are therefore British. That's a massive distinction. That's not the sort of, you know, boilerplate, civnat, if you're born in Britain, you're British, if you have a British passport, you're British, if you swear allegiance to British values, you're British, and even if you're ethnically Pakistani and born in Pakistan, you can come over and be an MP. No. That is saying that only English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish people should be eligible to hold political office in England, Wales, Scotland, or Ireland. Great. It's just common sense. Loads of other countries do the same too. As Rupert points out, how many British people are in the Japanese Diet? Well, there aren't. And that's because Japan wants to be run by Japanese people, and you can't make the affirmative case of why the British people should be subordinated to rule by foreigners. That's a punishment in the Bible, Jacob. We're not doing that, thank you very much. And then the other interesting one was that Jacob Rees-Mogg has a real stick in his craw about Tommy Robinson. He thinks he's the most far-right man in Britain. I am very much to the right of Tommy Robinson, because Tommy Robinson only thinks that Islam and Islamism, rather than just... I mean, he still says Islam proper, but he says he's not antagonistic to British Muslims. He thinks that's the only issue. And if Islam weren't here, then all the other issues of immigration would go away. And I just think that's incorrect. I think there are sort of cultural habits, in-group loyalties among Sikhs and Hindus and even Christian Africans, especially Africans who aren't Christian, that are a problem. And I don't want my country to be demographically and thereby culturally terraformed into somewhere unrecognisable, even if we didn't have Islam as one of the most violent, indigestible tribal problems in the country. And Jacob tries to use Tommy Robinson as leverage against Rupert Lowe here. And Rupert masterfully dismantles this sort of tripwire of a question. Because he refuses to concede to the Liberal standards. He refuses to concede that Tommy Robinson is the most dangerous man in Britain, which would thereby position the Boris Wave government as moderate, despite bringing in millions of third world immigrants into our country. You know, Priti Patel is way more dangerous for Britain than Tommy Robinson. He then turned the question back onto the complicity of the establishment, including the Tories, in the Pakistani rape gang scandal. And then, when Jacob says, well, you know, we didn't talk about it because we were afraid of sensitivities about race, Rupert just says, I don't care. Very courageous.
One person who does seem to me to be far right is Tommy Robinson.
Yes.
I assume you wouldn't want to be associated with him and his somewhat extreme statements.
Well, I'm not associated with Tommy. I think, as I've said in the past, Tommy has been right about the rape gangs, and we haven't talked about our rape gang inquiry, which again I think we should possibly touch.
Which is a very important issue, yes.
So
I'm glad GB News actually has
Tommy
done
Robinson,
the
I've
work.
given him credit, and the establishment for some reason, I think, fears Tommy Robinson because, you know, he is somebody who's been prepared. He was brought up in Luton, as you know. He saw at first hand what was happening. And the rape gang issue has been going on for probably 50 years, but...
The point he's making is Tommy Robinson would not exist as a bogeyman or just as a folk hero, no matter how you view him, if the establishment had not imported the rapists and continued to cover up their crimes. Tommy Robinson would still be flipping properties with his family and going to Luton FC matches, if not for the basically war crimes that our government has imported. So, trying to get someone to ritualistically denounce Tommy Robinson is actually just stopping the conversation from moving on to the actual issue that made Tommy Robinson possible.
Accelerating really after the Blairite sort of era, and particularly into the early 2000s. So, and he was talking about it in 2001, 2, 3. And he's been right. He is absolutely right about that issue. And I believe if somebody's right about something, you have to give them credit for it. But the establishment fears Tommy Robinson for some reason. I'm not quite sure why. I think they...
What's also interesting about Rupert is he doesn't tie his fortunes to anyone, but he will still be gentlemanly if they've done something correct. For example, he hasn't sat there and insulted Kemi Badenoch the entire time. He's been acted like a patrician to her, shown her some sympathy with the difficult hand she's been dealt by inheriting the Tory party, which is a poisoned brand. It doesn't mean he wants to join the Tories. It doesn't mean he thinks the Tories deserve another go in government. But it means that he's going to be polite and give credit where it's due. Same with Tommy Robinson. He's not going to tie his fortunes to whichever project Tommy Robinson decides to embark on. But it does mean that he doesn't feel the need to throw him under the bus, and just as a matter of pure honesty, you have to say, yeah, of course he was right about the grooming gangs. And we wouldn't be talking about it now if not for his contributions to the national conversation.
I don't know what he has or hasn't done wrong. I give him credit for being right on this
He's
issue.
got a criminal record for fraud, which is quite serious.
But so
Politicians have done way worse. Like way worse. I don't know, like demographically gerrymander our country against our wishes. A bunch of politicians also have convictions for fraud. And for some reason, you're happy to have them on GB News. Why not sit down with them, Jacob? Seriously, have a conversation with them. Be interesting.
of quite a lot of people.
Well, not that many.
Quite a lot of people have got a criminal record.
Well, not in the circles I move in. Not many.
I haven't, and you haven't, but some have.
No.
Actually, they do in the circles that you move in, Jacob, because a bunch of Tory politicians have been done for sexual impropriety. Like, what's his name? Jamie something, the first trans MP that your government, Boris Johnson's government, got up in question time to celebrate. What was the other one? Crispin Blunt, really creepy guy. The Tory party is full of sexual reprobates. So, yeah, that's, again, way worse than Tommy Robinson. No matter how you feel about, Robinson's views on foreign policy or his views on immigration, I mean, the Tory party is a worse force in Britain than Tommy Robinson.
But so look, I don't judge him for that, but he has been right on this issue. And when we did the rape gang inquiry, and the reason we did the rape gang inquiry is because I sat in the chamber next to Nigel Farage when he said he would have a rape gang inquiry. He took all the plaudits for it. He went on all the media channels saying, he would be prepared to go all the way and have an independent rape gang inquiry, and then he failed to do it.
What he's referencing there is, by the way, Nigel Farage going on Nick Ferrari's show on LBC saying it's not statutory, but it will be privately funded and we will do it, and then not doing it. And actually, denigrating Rupert's privately funded inquiry very recently, saying it's not worth the paper it's written on, to which the families of the victims and the victims themselves responded with outrage because Rupert was the first person to actually listen to their concerns and is intending to proceed with private prosecutions to keep his promise.
So I decided to do it with my team. We read some of the transcripts. That's what got us pretty upset about this, which, as you know, the court's making it very difficult to get hold of. There's a suggestion that the Labour Party is systematically destroying some of those court records, which would be a disgrace if they have. And we decided to do a crowdfunder, and we very quickly raised we actually raised 620,000. We checked the money and returned 20,000 that we didn't think we could accept. And
that was Ben Habib asking for, what was it, 5,000 back, by the way? Like, I donated to this, and I'd never asked for my money back. It's a very worthy cause.
With 600,000, unlike the J report, which cost 186 million, we've done our own private report with the help of a wonderful girl called Sammy Woodhouse, who was a victim herself, who has a child by her rapist. And we've discovered, as you know, this pervasive evil which has been happening. It's not just in a few places, Jacob. I mean, Labour tries to say it's siloed in 3 or 4 places. No. This is happening in virtually every town and city in the UK. And this is the systematic abuse, rape, grooming of white working class girls by largely Pakistani Muslim men. And most of them are from one part of Pakistan, which is called Mirpur. So we're going to publish, I've seen the draft, we've done all the work. Sammy and her team spent a year talking to all the witnesses, getting the witness statements, getting the bundles together. We had a wonderful barrister called Graham Smith. We sat for 2 weeks. It was one of the worst 2 weeks of my life. I heard some of the most appalling stories.
I actually contributed some of my reporting on this because I've been reporting on the gangs for a couple of years, and also, international trafficking efforts targeting women and girls from Muslim countries. I spoke to Rupert, obviously outside the hearing, off camera. It deeply affected him. This was the reason he launched Restore. It was because he heard the most horrific torture underwent by lovely women, and he knew that the political establishment did nothing about it. So it comes from a place of conviction. Again, I wouldn't be saying all of this if I didn't know the people involved, because I first met Rupert in November 2024, and he was a good man then. He listened to my criticisms of reform at the time. When he was expelled, I had nothing to gain by standing by him and saying, this is wrong, this seems completely bogus. Why did Zia Yusuf wait 3 months to file a police report if it was really a lethal threat against his life? I could have had a safe and comfortable career working with reform if I would have kept my mouth shut, like plenty of other people. I didn't need to, because I don't think dishonesty will fix these problems. And the problems that we're talking about here is the rape of millions of girls by men that never needed to be here in the first place. And Nigel Farage is more worried about getting called racist for saying we need to deport the rapists than about actually doing things to get rid of them and keep children safe. And I'm going to back the guy that wants to solve the problem rather than the party that reported him to the police and tried to put him in prison for promising to solve the problem.
That's all going to be documented. That's all got to be produced in a form which is legal, and we're not going to be sued for producing it, so there'll be redactions where necessary. But
you do have parliamentary privilege.
But trust me, when we finish this, because the police have failed, social services have failed, the NHS has failed, the entire system has failed these girls, right? And meanwhile, they have been attacking white young men as sort of, capable of pervasive evil. But meanwhile, this has been going on, and Labour has turned a blind eye. And this is why I think Labour, when our report comes out, it's going to show you that Labour has put the welfare of white working class girls behind the Muslim vote.
But look at how quickly Rupert shifted the framing from where the question started. You probably haven't even been thinking about this, right, as he's been answering. The question that began was, do you disavow Tommy Robinson? And Rupert has moved to, Tommy Robinson was right about the rape gangs, I kept my promise on the rape gangs, Nigel Farage didn't, we've spoken to the victims, we're going to do private prosecutions, we might use parliamentary privilege to disclose some of the people involved, and the Labour Party knew about it and covered it up. They are the real villains, and they have been victimizing, scapegoating white young men who I'm concerned about. Speaking as Rupert here, Rupert's very concerned about the future of young Englishmen, whereas they have been farming votes from the community, Pakistani Muslims, that produced the rapists. We've gone from, will you disavow Tommy Robinson, to the Labour Party have been importing Pakistani rapists and farming their votes while victimizing white girls and scapegoating white men. He hasn't conceded any ground at any point in that answer, and he has refocused the ire from bogeyman Tory Robinson to the establishment that's complicit in large-scale child abuse and the Radio Rwanda-style rhetoric towards the indigenous population of this country. Outstanding. Just what an absolute masterclass of how to handle a question like this. Everyone should study this interview and take notes.
Because they wanted power. And I think anyone who puts a moral obligation beneath their own vested interests is vile, and I don't see how anyone can ever vote for them, even if you're a socialist. This is a creation of the Labour Party. I have to say the Tories aren't clean, because they had an opportunity to do something about this. And
the Tories are guilty in the rape gang cover-up. Rupert Lowe. So again, those alleging, oh, he's a Tory plant, literally saying they're responsible for covering up child rape. Like, okay, you're just lying. And if you want to keep lying, fine. It's frustrating that people can just lie with very little consequences, but those lies do compound, and then you torch your own credibility. And if you're lying on behalf of Reform, you're going to torch Reform's credibility too. So keep lying and see where it gets you.
And they singularly failed to do so. This has been festering and growing probably for 25 or 30 years, started maybe 50 years ago.
There's been a terrible nervousness about saying anything on race, and we've seen this with the Ruta Bayana case and with the Kalakane case.
But we're not frightened of talking about it.
And you're not, and that's
we
important.
Speak the truth.
I would just say one thing, that
we aren't frightened. We don't care. So I'm just going to finish this. Restore Britain have brought their podcast back. Charlie, Rupert, Lewis did an excellent episode, gives you some insights into their campaign in Great Yarmouth and their driving philosophy why the party was set up. And take this to heart. This is the advice, this is the spirit of Restore Britain. This is what we should all be emulating. When you're called a racist or a bigot or a far right or any other buzzword to try and shut down these necessary conversations about what is being done to us, just repeat Rupert's words here.
Encourage the British people that if they want their country back, they've got to adopt the same attitude that we do. And the key three words are, when you're called a racist or you're called a bigot or you're called right-wing, which I don't even think we are, I just think we're the common sense party, the three key words are, I don't care.
Yes.
So I encourage the
power those three words give you should give you the courage to go forward, speak the truth, deflect the lies thrown at you by the vested interests and the hands on the Mingvars of whichever colour of uniparty that wants to get into Downing Street, and just follow Rupert's example. Say, I don't care. What you do care about is the country that we're going to impart onto our respective children or grandchildren, and slings and arrows and slurs and insults thrown our way don't matter. What matters is restoring Britain.